It was a family party celebrating my beloved dad's retirement until I found out that my stepmother wanted to sell his entire business, which he had built up over the years. But she didn't understand that it wasn't that simple. I knew something was wrong the moment Deborah picked up her glass. The smile on her face was too polished, too bright, like it had been lacquered on, with the same practiced precision as her French manicure. "Let's raise a glass," she purred, standing under the glinting chandeliers of the Marlowe Grand Ballroom. "To Michael's well-earned retirement, and to new beginnings, especially the kind that come with a lucrative exit strategy." Polite laughter scattered through the room like marbles dropped on marble, light, uncomfortable, waiting to see how to react. I didn't laugh. I didn't move. My champagne flute was halfway to my lips, the bubbles frozen mid-ascent. And me? I was frozen too. She did it. She actually did it. Across the ballroom, my father, Michael, still handsome in that aging news anchor kind of way, lowered his eyes to the floor, shame written all over his face. He didn't need to say a word. That one glance confirmed what I'd feared for months. They were selling the company. My company. And they were doing it without me. The applause came late and hesitant. I barely heard it. My ears were full of a rushing sound, like I was standing at the edge of an ocean, heart pounding in my throat. 1,000 watts of lighting sparkled off the cut crystal chandeliers overhead, and suddenly, everything felt overexposed. Every face too visible, every smile too false. Deborah clinked her glass against Michael's, lips curled just slightly at the corners. That smirk, so smug and subtle, was the final twist of the knife. She knew I hadn't been told. That was the point. She wanted this moment. She'd waited for it. All around us, the room hummed with opulence. Gold trim, velvet accents, 5-tier cake in the corner, its sugar-dusted perfection as staged as everything else tonight. I had spent weeks helping to plan this gala, down to the wine pairings and seating charts, thinking it was a celebration of legacy, of continuity. Instead, it was my farewell party. I just hadn't gotten the memo. Michael finally lifted his gaze, met mine briefly, and then looked away, like he couldn't stomach what he saw in my eyes. That broke something. Not in the way people usually mean it, not like I shattered or collapsed. No, what broke was the last sliver of hope I'd been holding on to. That maybe my father had been misled. Maybe he hadn't known what Deborah was doing behind the scenes. Maybe he still saw me. But in that moment, I realized he saw everything. And he'd still chosen silence. Deborah turned toward the crowd with that breezy elegance she'd mastered since the day she married my father. "Michael and I are looking forward to a little more time for ourselves. Travel, leisure, sunsets without spreadsheets." A ripple of chuckles followed, but the words tasted like ash in my mouth. She was painting a picture. One where I didn't exist, where the company I'd bled for, Dawson Solutions, was nothing more than a line item to be liquidated. After all I'd done to rebuild it. After all the hours, sacrifices, negotiations, she was rewriting the narrative. And my father was letting her. The man who once sat beside me at our scratched-up kitchen table, teaching me how to balance equations, now couldn't meet my gaze across a ballroom. That was betrayal. Not the decision, the erasure. I set my champagne glass down, untouched, my fingers curled inward slowly, gripping nothing, grounding myself. I felt eyes on me. Familiar ones. Old board members, investors, distant relatives. They were waiting to see how I'd react, waiting to see if I'd make a scene. But I wasn't giving them that. Not yet. I smiled. Not the big, toothy smile I wore when giving keynote addresses or closing 7-figure deals. No, this one was small, tight. A smile made of steel and silence. Because Deborah may have thought this was her mic drop moment. But she had no idea what was coming next. And I had come prepared. I barely touched my food. The lamb was cooked perfectly, of course. This venue didn't make mistakes like that. The sauce, something French and overly reduced, shimmered on the plate like it belonged in a gallery. But each bite tasted like cardboard. I didn't need to eat. I needed to think. Deborah was glowing under the warm lights, holding court at the head table like some reigning socialite turned mogul. The clink of crystal and low hum of conversation filled the air. If you weren't paying attention, it looked like a celebration. A family legacy being passed on with grace and gratitude. But if you looked closely, if you really watched, something colder flickered beneath the warmth. I sat beside my father, my posture effortless, my smile practiced. Deborah had intentionally placed me there, I realized. Between Michael and some retired advisor she could count on to remain charmingly oblivious. I watched her work the room. She called it hosting. I called it marking territory. Every compliment she offered had a subtext. Every joke, a dig. She didn't need to say my name, that was the real art of it. She could erase me with a smile and a shared laugh. "Did you try the Bordeaux, Michael?" she asked sweetly from across the table, brushing his shoulder lightly with her fingertips. "It pairs beautifully with a sense of closure." My father chuckled, weakly. I glanced at him, but he avoided my eyes again. I saw the tightness in his jaw, the way his hand trembled slightly as he lifted his wine glass. He wasn't at ease. That should have brought me some sense of satisfaction. It didn't. It just made the silence between us louder. Deborah leaned in toward the woman seated next to her, an elegant blonde I recognized from last quarter's investor summit. "Michael and I are finally going to take that Napa trip we've been dreaming about," she said, swirling her glass lazily. "No more quarterly forecasts, no more red-eye flights to charm nervous shareholders." The woman smiled, nodding with polite admiration. "Sounds heavenly. Who's taking over operations?" "Oh," Deborah said with a little wave of her hand, as if brushing away something trivial. "The board's working it out. Probably bring in someone with fresh ideas. Someone more forward-facing." I didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't blink, because this was the part one expected. The soft propaganda, the charm offensive, the subtle rewriting of the future, one in which I didn't exist, at least not in a leadership role. I sipped my water, tapped my nails softly against the base of the glass. She was laying groundwork, floating the narrative, and yet she hadn't said it outright, not yet, because she didn't know how much I knew. I watched her laugh again, the sound just a touch too bright. Her diamond earrings swayed with every carefully modulated nod. She looked like the kind of woman who'd be featured in an executive Women of the Northwest magazine spread. Power heels, soft power tactics. She was good, but not good enough. The woman seated beside me leaned in, whispering, "Laura, are you all right? You've barely spoken." I turned toward her and smiled, warm and steady, just soaking it all in. Because that's what you do when someone's trying to bury you under the weight of politeness and pleasantries. You smile back. You let them think the shovel hasn't reached you yet. I folded my napkin delicately, placed it in my lap, and tilted my head toward Deborah's voice again, now talking about her exciting new chapter. She wasn't gloating, she was rehearsing, which meant she didn't think the finale had happened yet. Good. She had no idea she was already in the third act. After dinner, the ballroom began to thin slightly, just enough for people to rise from their seats and meander toward the bar, the terrace, or small huddles near the dessert table. I waited a beat longer before I stood, not because I needed air, but because I knew she would move next. Deborah never let a lull go to waste. She rose gracefully, clasping her satin clutch in both hands, and started making her way toward the far corner of the room. Her pace was deliberate. The swish of her mauve gown trailed softly behind her, like the tail of a practiced performance. I let a group of guests pass before casually following, at a distance. There was a massive floral arrangement in the back corner, white orchids, deep plum roses, and something exotic I couldn't name. It was extravagant, towering, and most importantly, provided excellent cover. I slipped behind it. From there, I could see just enough. Deborah was speaking to a man I didn't recognize. late 50s, tailored charcoal suit, expensive cufflinks. His stance screamed private equity. The way he leaned in said discretion. She lowered her voice, but not quite enough. "We've already lined up 2 interested buyers," she said, her voice smooth and confident. "They'll wait until the ink dries on the retirement package, of course. But yes, they're prepared to move quickly." Buyers, plural. So it wasn't just an exit plan, it was a fire sale. "Michael's tired," she added, with just enough sigh to sound concerned. "He needs peace. I promised I'd take care of things. The business, the transition, all of it." The man nodded. "And your stepdaughter? She's involved?" Deborah laughed lightly, as if someone had just suggested something absurd. "Laura's brilliant, of course, but she's sentimental. She still sees the company as her father's legacy. She's not built for this kind of move." My breath caught, but I didn't move. "Besides," Deborah went on, "Michael and I have plans. Once this is done, liquidated and finalized, we're free. Bali, Lisbon. A vineyard, maybe." She tilted her head, eyes gleaming. "You can't do those things when you're shackled to a boardroom." The man gave a half smile. "And the staff? We'll keep a few for transition. But the new owners will bring in their own team. That's the point, isn't it? Fresh vision. Clean slate." There it was, the whole plan. Spoken aloud, confirmed. My fingers curled tighter around the clutch at my side, but my lips, they curved. Slowly. Not in fury, not even in shock, because I already knew. This moment, the lie behind the smile, the whispered betrayal, the false promise of family unity, was exactly what I'd come for. Deborah thought tonight was her curtain call. But this was just the dress rehearsal. I took a quiet step back from the flowers, heels clicking softly against the marble as I turned. Across the room, the MC tapped the mic gently, asking guests to return to their seats. It was time for speeches. Perfect. Let her have the next 5 minutes of self-congratulations. Then it would be my turn. I walked calmly back toward the ballroom floor, heart steady, each step deliberate. She had no idea the spotlight was about to shift. I took the stage before anyone could stop me. Not rudely, not dramatically, just confidently. The MC had just finished announcing something about reflecting on legacies and leadership, his voice floating above clinking glasses and scattered applause. Deborah was mid-turn in her chair, expecting, what? A toast from a former partner? Another slide deck tribute to Michael's career? Instead, she saw me, and I watched her smile freeze. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I said into the microphone, my voice calm, clear, and far steadier than I felt. "For celebrating not only my father's long and respected career, but the company that many of you in this room helped build from the ground up." I paused, scanning the audience. Familiar faces. Colleagues, early investors, people who remembered the early years, before Deborah, before luxury galas and press packages. I found Adam standing near the back, right where we'd agreed. He gave me the smallest nod. "I wasn't planning on speaking tonight," I continued, "but sometimes moments arise that demand we speak up, especially when silence starts to feel a lot like complicity." A ripple moved through the room, the kind people try to stifle with polite coughs and tightened smiles. Michael shifted in his seat. Deborah folded her hands over her clutch like it was a shield. I reached into my bag and slowly, deliberately, pulled out the documents. Real paper, thick, cream-colored, embossed seal at the bottom corner. It made a satisfying sound when I placed it on the podium. Like punctuation. I'd like to share a small update, one I imagine some of you haven't heard yet, though there were plans being made without my knowledge, so who can say? A few people laughed awkwardly. I didn't. I flipped open the first page. "Several years ago," I said, glancing at my father. "During a difficult stretch for Dawson Solutions, my father and I had a conversation. It was quiet. Not in a boardroom, not with lawyers present, just the two of us. We were trying to keep the company afloat, and he made a decision, one I never questioned, because at the time, it wasn't about power. It was about preservation. Deborah's fingers tightened around her glass, her eyes didn't move. My father quietly transferred a majority stake in Dawson Solutions to me. It was a safety net, insurance, in case anything ever threatened the heart of what we'd built. The room fell utterly silent. A fork clinked onto a plate. Someone gasped quietly. Michael's head dropped into his hands. I let the moment sit. I never used that ownership. I didn't need to, until now. I turned the pages, showing the signatures, the notary stamp, the dated transfer agreement. And then I looked straight at Deborah. So before we move forward with talk of selling or liquidating or traveling the globe while carving up what was once a family business, I thought you all should know who holds controlling interest. The silence that followed wasn't just stunned, it was reverent, like the air had been sucked out of the room and replaced with something heavier, denser. Truth. I could feel everyone looking, not just at me, but at Deborah, at Michael, at the story they'd been quietly telling, now unraveling. My voice softened. This company was never just about quarterly numbers. It was about what we built, what we protected, and who we trusted. Adam stepped forward from the shadows, holding up a small leather-bound book, the notary ledger. The signatures, I added gently, are very real and very legal. I stepped back from the podium, letting the words settle, letting Deborah squirm beneath the weight of them. Her empire of charm had just cracked. And the crowd? They were seeing it. Deborah laughed. It was sharp, brittle, and about 2 seconds too late to be convincing. The kind of laugh that cracks at the edges. "Oh, Laura," she said, rising from her seat with slow, almost theatrical grace. "You always did love your little dramatic flourishes." The audience didn't laugh with her. She glanced at them, searching for an ally, but found only curiosity, too many tilted heads and furrowed brows. She adjusted her necklace, as if polishing a version of herself that had already started to tarnish. "Darling, those papers could have come from anywhere," she said, voice still lilting but tense beneath the sugar. "I'm sure it was a lovely gesture between father and daughter, but let's not pretend it means anything." I didn't move. Adam stepped forward, calm and composed, just as we'd rehearsed. "I can confirm the documents are authentic," he said, voice smooth as velvet. "Notarized 5 years ago in my office. Witnessed by 2 parties. Filed officially and—" He held up his phone, digitally backed up with a time-stamped copy. A soft murmur moved through the crowd. Not gasps this time. Something quieter, more dangerous. Belief. Deborah's eyes darted toward Michael, who still hadn't looked up. She tilted her head and spoke gently. "Michael, please, tell them. This isn't real. It can't be." Michael didn't move. She took a step toward him. "Michael!" His fingers finally dropped from his face. He looked years older than he had 30 seconds ago. He cleared his throat, but his voice cracked on the first try. We had a hard year," he said quietly, his words directed not to her, but to the tablecloth, to the air. "We weren't sure the company would survive. I wanted to protect Laura's future, just in case." That "we" hung there like a broken promise. Deborah's eyes went wide, disbelief tightening her whole face. "We agreed we would never. Michael, you said." "We agreed to give her a chance," he said, louder now. There was steel in it, regret too, but something firm beneath it. And I did. For the first time that night, Deborah's smile dropped completely. Gone was the hostess, the orchestrator of toasts and centerpieces. Her lip twitched, her hand dropped from her necklace. She took a full step back, as if the floor beneath her had just cracked open. I looked at her calmly, let her squirm. She was unraveling. But this wasn't the moment to gloat. Not yet. Because denial wasn't her endgame. It was just her first line of defense, and I'd come prepared for all of them. Deborah turned on Michael like a switch had been flipped. The charm disappeared. Just gone. No fade, no softness, like a mask hitting the marble floor. "You betrayed me," she hissed, her voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. "You looked me in the eye, in our home, and told me the shares were untouchable, that she would never." She caught herself, just barely. But it was too late. The words hung in the air, trembling with venom. She hadn't said my name. She'd said she, like I was something beneath her, like the very syllables of Laura tasted sour in her mouth. People were no longer pretending to sip their drinks or check their phones. They were watching now, really watching. Her unraveling had become the evening's unplanned entertainment. Michael sat like a man hollowed out, shoulders slumped, gaze fixed on a point far away, maybe a decade ago. Maybe back when he still ran the company instead of letting someone else run him. Deborah didn't care. Or maybe she did, but not enough. "You said the shares were frozen," she continued, her voice rising an octave, eyes wide and glittering with disbelief, or maybe fury. "You promised me we'd move forward together. Together, as in the two of them, as in not me." Her hand flew up toward the crowd, gesturing like she was still in control, like this was a misunderstanding she could smooth over with the right inflection. "Look, obviously emotions are high tonight," she said, forcing out a laugh that sounded like it came from someone else's throat. "I mean, who brings legal documents to a gala?" She cast a fake smile toward me. "It's a party, not a deposition." A few people shifted in their seats, but no one laughed. Not anymore. I stepped closer to the mic again, not to argue, just to reclaim the room. "It's not a deposition," I said quietly. "It's a clarification. One that's been a long time coming." She spun to Michael again. "You told me you were protecting our future, that after the retirement party, we'd move quickly. You said we'd take the offer from Henderson Capital and be done with this. Dead weight, dead weight." She didn't even realize she'd said it out loud. Or maybe she did, and thought the room would still be on her side. But the shift had already happened. It wasn't just my word against hers anymore. It was her words, against herself. Michael finally stood, slow and stiff, like his body wasn't quite ready to carry the burden of his choices. He looked at her, his voice flat. "We agreed to give her a chance because she earned one." The moment hit like a pin dropping into a canyon. Deborah's mouth opened, then closed. Her hands fell to her sides, fingers twitching. She looked smaller now, not in stature, but in power. Her audience had vanished. Her script had fallen apart. The co-conspirator she thought would back her had stepped quietly out of frame. And all I had done was show the truth. One piece at a time. I didn't need to raise my voice. The room had already fallen into a hush. That collective stillness, where even the air seems to wait. I stepped from the podium and walked to the side of the stage where a modest screen had been mounted. No dramatic flourish, no theatrical pause. Just a quiet, deliberate click on the remote in my hand. The lights dimmed slightly, and the screen flickered to life. Behind me, the company logo appeared. Dawson Solutions, bold and crisp against a white background. Then, a simple slide, a bank statement. A few people leaned forward. "Deborah," I said gently, almost conversationally, "do you recognize this account?" She didn't answer. "This routing number matches one registered to a holding company based in the Cayman Islands. You signed for it personally, as majority partner of LeClaire Associates. That's the shell company you set up 3 years ago, yes?" A few gasps scattered through the crowd now, soft, like someone had knocked the wind out of them. I've traced 5 transfers over the last 18 months, each one timed just before a board meeting. Each one listed as, quote, "consulting expenses." I let the slide shift to the next screen. "But the recipient was you?" The screen now showed a grainy image of a signature line. Deborah's name, Her hand, her paper trail. She finally moved, lurching forward a step, her voice loud and cracking. "This is absurd. A fabrication. Anyone can fake a screenshot." "It's not a screenshot," I interrupted, still calm. "It's a mirror of the bank's own records, obtained through a subpoena." Adam stepped forward again, holding up a folder. He opened it slowly, and even from the stage, the gold notary seal caught the light. "These records are verified," he said, his tone more formal now. "Not just through my office, but through forensic financial analysts. Multiple confirmations. Each transfer is traceable, documented, and logged in the company's financial system, under incorrect codes." More slides rotated behind me now, each one damning, each one final. I watched her break in slow motion. Not with screaming, not with defiance, but with the quiet, creeping terror of someone realizing they've run out of ways to lie. Her mouth opened, closed. She turned to Michael like he might still save her. He looked at the screen, not at her. She tried one more tactic, turning toward the audience, arms spread in a desperate shrug. "Everyone moves money around. It's part of the game," she said, voice rising in pitch. "You all know that. You've done it yourselves. Don't act so righteous now." No one met her eyes. The truth was written across every face in the room. This wasn't clever accounting. It was betrayal. And Deborah wasn't the clever strategist anymore. She was the liability. I stood at the edge of the stage, hands steady, voice clear. These funds weren't just hidden. They were stolen, redirected from company reserves earmarked for employee bonuses, R&D, and operational expansion. This wasn't oversight. It was a plan. I stepped closer to the screen. One last click. The slide faded to black. The room fell into silence, deeper than anything that had come before. Deborah said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. And I had only just begun. For a moment, it was so quiet, I could hear the soft clink of melting ice in someone's untouched drink. Then Deborah snapped. "You ungrateful little witch!" The words tore from her throat, raw and ragged, her voice a pitch higher than anyone in the room had ever heard. Gone was the velvet hostess, the measured strategist, the polished step-grand matriarch of Dawson Solutions. What remained was feral, cornered. She shoved her chair back so hard it screeched across the marble floor, nearly toppling as she lunged toward the podium. Not toward me, toward the document still laid out like an indictment under the ballroom lights. "No, no, this is not how this ends," she screamed, reaching for the folder Adam had closed just seconds before. I stepped back instinctively, but I didn't need to. 2 members of the venue's security team were already moving. I'd quietly arranged for them earlier in the week, just in case. I hadn't been certain she'd implode this spectacularly, but I'd hoped. "Let go of me," she shrieked as one of the guards caught her by the arm, gently but firmly. "This is mine! I built this!" The room was stunned, half of them frozen in disbelief, the other half watching with a sort of grim clarity, like everything that had been murky for years had finally come into sharp focus. "You think she earned it?" Deborah spat, her voice jagged, flinging her hand in my direction. "Laura was a child when this company was founded. She was in college when we were keeping the doors open with duct tape and prayer." "Deborah," Michael said from behind her. His voice was low, almost broken. "That's enough." She whipped toward him. "Oh, now you want to speak?" Her voice cracked, hysteria bleeding through the last of her restraint. "Now that she's humiliated me in front of everyone? You gave it to her. Behind my back. After everything I've done for you." And there it was. The mask was gone. The act stripped bare. She wasn't defending the company. She wasn't protecting a legacy. She was fighting for control, for the illusion of it, for the empire she thought she was entitled to simply because she'd learned how to speak fluent boardroom and stand perfectly at your side for a photo op. Michael's hands were limp at his sides. I could tell he wanted to say more. I could also tell he didn't know how, and maybe it was better that way. Silence was, after all, the language he'd used for too long. Deborah thrashed once, twice, before her heels slipped slightly on the polished floor. One of the security guards steadied her as gently as he could. "You're going to regret this," she hissed at me, her chest heaving. "You think this is a win? This is a trap. I'll sue. I'll bury you in litigation. I'll make sure no one takes you seriously ever again." I held her gaze and smiled. Not cruelly, not smugly, just calmly. "You're free to try." The words landed with the weight of inevitability. Not a threat, not a warning, a fact. Because what the crowd had just witnessed wasn't a misunderstanding, or a family squabble, or even a strategic disagreement. It was a hostile takeover attempt by someone who just proved, in full view of everyone who mattered, that she was no longer fit to hold a stake in anything. Her meltdown had sealed the verdict. The story wasn't hers anymore. It never had been. Backstage, the lights felt different, cooler, quieter. The weight of the ballroom, the eyes, the cameras, gone. Just a narrow hallway with velvet ropes, the muted echo of distant footsteps, and the hollow hush that always follows a storm. My father was already there, sitting on a worn banquet chair against the wall. His tie was loosened, his shoulders hunched, not with exhaustion exactly, with something heavier. The collapse of a story he'd spent years trying to keep stitched together. I stood there for a long second, just watching him. He didn't look up. "You should have told me," I said softly. He exhaled through his nose, eyes fixed on the floor like it might offer a script. "I thought I could manage it," he murmured. "That if I kept things calm, kept Deborah steady, everything would work itself out." A bitter smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Didn't quite pan out that way. His lips twitched like he almost laughed. Then he shook his head slowly. "You know, when your mother died, I didn't think I'd ever be able to hold this company together. You were in grad school, I was drowning. Deborah came in like oxygen." I stayed quiet, not because I agreed, but because I finally understood the shape of his grief. It wasn't sharp. It was subtle, lingering, the kind that fogs judgment in the name of survival. "She made herself indispensable," he continued. "She had ideas, connections. She took things off my plate, and I let her. I told myself it was for the best." He looked at me then, really looked at me. "But I knew what she was doing, Laura. I knew she wanted more than influence, and I let her believe she could have it." I nodded slowly. "And me?" His expression twisted, like the words hurt on their way out. "I thought you were too good for the fight, too principled to survive it." I stared at him for a beat, and then said what I'd never said before. "I learned to survive from watching you. The long hours, the patience, the way you negotiated without ever raising your voice." His eyes glistened. "But somewhere along the way," I added, "I also learned how easy it is to disappear in a room you helped build." He flinched at that, just slightly. "You didn't just let her try to erase me," I said, voice still soft. "You helped her do it, by staying silent." He nodded once, a slow, weighted acknowledgement. "You're right. I didn't need more than that. I wasn't there to drag him through guilt. I just needed him to see it, to say it." We sat in silence for a moment. "I never thought it would come to this," he said finally. I folded my hands in my lap. "It didn't have to, but now that it has, I'll protect what's ours, whether you stand beside me or not." He looked over, something like awe flickering behind his tired eyes. "I want to," he said, and I believed him, not because the words were enough, but because, for the first time in a long time, he looked like he might finally mean them. The next morning, I stood at the head of the conference table where my father used to sit. The room felt different now, not just because of the lingering scent of last night's drama, faint perfume, chilled champagne, something sharp and metallic underneath, but because the weight of the company no longer sat behind a man's name or beside a woman's curated smile. It sat with me, and for the first time it felt right. The board had gathered earlier than planned, the tension in the air tighter than the Windsor knots around their collars. I recognized the cautious glances. Half curiosity, half calculation. They weren't here to question the outcome. That had already unfolded. Publicly, definitively. No. Now they were wondering what kind of leader I'd be. I let the silence work for me. Then I said, "We won't be selling Dawson Solutions." The quiet crackled. One man adjusted his glasses. Another scribbled something down. "We're stabilizing, realigning, and rebuilding." I moved to the screen behind me, clicked to the first slide. It wasn't numbers or forecasts. Not yet. It was a photograph, black and white, from the early days. My father, our first office. The company's name painted on the glass by hand. "I'm not here to burn it all down," I said. "I'm here to remind everyone what we built and who we built it for." The next slide. Our new advisory board, including 3 women I'd personally mentored. The next, an internal audit plan, transparent and enforceable. Then the next, plans for innovation, expansion, growth. By the end, no one asked who was in charge anymore. They already knew. That afternoon, the press release went live. Dawson Solutions to remain independent under new majority shareholder Laura Dawson. The headline ran beside a photo of me standing on the steps of our headquarters. No husband, no co-founder, no figure hovering behind me. Just me. And the phone didn't stop ringing. Investors, former colleagues, journalists, all with the same questions. How did this happen? What comes next? I answered carefully, measured, but not small. The company was never just numbers on paper. It was built by people who cared deeply about its mission, and it will continue with that same integrity under my leadership. I didn't mention Deborah by name. I didn't need to. Her absence had become the loudest headline of all, but I knew it wasn't over. Because power, once lost, doesn't go quietly. That evening, as I stepped out of the building, my assistant intercepted me near the elevator. "There's a woman downstairs," she said, her voice tight. "Lawyer. Says she's representing Deborah Franklin." Of course she was. I descended slowly, steadily, heels clicking against tile-like punctuation. When I entered the lobby, the lawyer was waiting. Suit sharp, hair pulled back, clipboard tucked under one arm like a weapon. She didn't smile. "Ms. Dawson," she said crisply, "I've been authorized to present a formal notice of pending litigation regarding wrongful transfer of corporate assets, defamation, and emotional damages." I raised an eyebrow. Deborah's still trying to play chess. Shame she forgot the board was already flipped. The lawyer extended the folder toward me. I didn't take it. Instead, I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "If your client wishes to proceed, she's welcome to. But be advised, every claim she makes will unearth more than she's prepared to explain under oath." The woman blinked, just once. "Tell her," I added, "that if she wants to gamble with what little reputation she has left, she'd better come ready to lose more than just money." And then I walked past her, head high. Because that's the thing about reclaiming what's yours. Once you've tasted that freedom, the silence of not shrinking, the clarity of not apologizing, you don't go back. Not for anyone, not even family.